Addiction. Section 1. Models of addictive behavior. The biological approach. Initiation. Addicts inherit a genetic predisposition to developing an addiction. It is likely that multiple genes are responsible for addictive behavior, but researchers have focused on the A1 variant of the DRD2 gene, a gene involved in the regulation of dopamine levels. This gene may increase people's sensitivity to the action of dopamine. More recently, researchers have identified specific genes, for example SLC6A3-9, which is responsible for removing dopamine from the synapse, which may also be involved with addiction. Maintenance. The mesolimbic dopamine system, which is concerned with memory, reward, and motivational processes, is involved with the maintenance of addictive behavior. In normal activity, cells in the mesolimbic dopamine system release small amounts of dopamine into the synapse. Addictive substances and behaviors increase dopamine levels in the synapse. Addicts continue with their addictive behavior because in order to experience the highs from the addiction, they need to maintain increasingly high levels of dopamine. Falling levels of dopamine can lead to unpleasant withdrawal symptoms. People who are more susceptible to addictions have inherited a more sensitive mesolimbic dopamine system. Relapse. Substances like nicotine activate the dopamine reward pathway, and the brain adapts to be in balance when the substance is present. This is called neuroadaptation. When the substance is discontinued, the adaptation is no longer needed and is experienced as withdrawal symptoms, which are unpleasant and are immediately relieved by using the substance. Evaluation of the biological model. Compare with another approach. For example, the biological model does not explain initiation as well as the behavioral/cognitive approach. Has led to effective treatments, for example nicotine replacement therapy for smoking. Absolves addicts of responsibility. If the causes of addiction are due to genes or dopamine levels, this relieves the addict of taking responsibility for their addiction and makes it less likely that the treatment will be successful. Best explanation, biopsychosocial model, involving an interaction of factors. Biological vulnerability involving the brain's reward systems, family and peer attitudes that support addictive behavior, high levels of impulsivity/cognitive distortions. Application to smoking. Initiation. A meta-analysis done by Thorkildsen et al. 2008 analysed data from 140,000 people and have discovered that there are DNA variants associated with whether people start smoking. It is convincing evidence because of the size of the study. However, the study shows a correlation between starting smoking and genetics, not causation. It is likely that genetics only lead to a predisposition to become dependent. An environmental trigger, for example peer influence, is needed to start the addiction. Maintenance. Shasta, 1977, conducted a double-blind study with adult smokers. Over a 4-week period, participants alternated between smoking high and low nicotine cigarettes. They smoked low nicotine cigarettes for 1 week and high nicotine cigarettes the next. As the model predicts, the subjects smoked more low than high nicotine cigarettes. This effect was especially strong for heavy smokers, who smoked 25% more of the low than high nicotine cigarettes. Relapse. Lerman 2007 tested smokers when they had abstained from smoking for 1 night and found increased blood flow to the parts of the brain associated with memory, reward, and learning, showing that these parts of the brain do become particularly active when a person is craving a cigarette. Application to gambling. Initiation. Slutsk 2010 looked at concordance rates of MZ and DZ twins in relation to gambling addiction. She studied nearly 5,000 individuals and found that the concordance rate was twice as high for MZ twins as for DZ twins. Maintenance. Chase and Clark 2010 studied 24 regular gamblers. They completed a computerized gambling game based on slot machines, whilst their midbrains were scanned using fMRI. Increased activity in the mesolimbic system resulted from wins, but crucially also from near misses. In addition, the higher the level of gambling severity, the greater the response recorded. Relapse. Stopping gambling results in the same kind of withdrawal symptoms associated with stopping drugs. Ray and Dickerson, 1981, found 60% of pathological gamblers reported physical side effects during the withdrawal, including insomnia, loss of appetite, muscle weakness, and breathing difficulties. And these were sometimes more severe than those reported by a comparison group during withdrawal from drugs. Evaluation of the learning approach. Compare with other approaches. Ignores well-documented biological base to addiction. However, be used in conjunction with the biological approach. Dopamine is involved with how we learn. Simplistic view of human behavior. addiction needs to be seen as more than just a simple stimulus-response pattern of behaviour. Best explanation: biopsychosocial model involving an interaction of factors, biological vulnerability involving the brain's reward systems, family and peer attitudes that support addictive behaviour, and high levels of impulsivity/cognitive distortions. Application to smoking. Initiation. Lader and Matheson, 1991, found that parents are a major influence on whether children start smoking. Children are twice as likely to smoke if their parents are smokers. Michelle and West, 1996, suggest that the way in which peers exert their influence is complex. In a large-scale study in Scotland, they found that having peers who smoke is not always a good predictor of whether children start smoking. The researchers found that some young people have a readiness to smoke, and it is only in this group that smoking peers have an influence. This suggests that social learning theory, learning simply through observing peers smoking, is not a complete explanation for the initiation of smoking. Maintenance. Snow and Bruce, 2002, looked at positive reinforcement. They carried out a self-report study of 241 teenage girls and showed that continuing to smoke is seen as a way of enhancing their social reputation and maintaining their group membership, providing support for the positively reinforcing effects of smoking. Relapse. Classical conditioning, cue reactivity paradigm. There are many cues that stimulate the urge to smoke, which makes abstention difficult. Schiffman, 1996, asked former smokers to record when and where they relapsed. He found that smokers relapsed in situations where cigarettes were readily available and in the presence of other smokers, showing the importance of these cues. Application to gambling. Initiation. Gupta et al. 1997 showed that observation and modelling of gambling behaviour of parents/family members had a significant influence on gambling behaviour in children. They surveyed 477 children aged 9 to 14 and found that 20% of children reported gambling regularly, and of these, 86% reported gambling with family members. Maintenance. Operant conditioning. Positive reinforcement from winning, or the buzz from the excitement of betting, or the fact that gamblers do not always win but continue to play is explained by the concept of variable schedules of reinforcement, schedules that pay off only intermittently. Variable schedules lead to more rapid and longer-lasting learning of gambling behaviour, which once acquired is more difficult to extinguish. Griffith and Park, 2003, suggest slot machines use principles of positive reinforcement, for example, high event frequency, with many opportunities for winning and a short payout interval. Rewards follow quickly to increase the addictive qualities of gambling activity. Relapse. Classical conditioning, cue reactivity paradigm. There are many cues that may stimulate the urge to gamble, which makes abstention difficult. Gamblers also relapse through negative reinforcement. Continuing to gamble helps them avoid withdrawal symptoms. Practical applications. Marlatt, 1990, suggested that an effective intervention for preventing relapse in problem gambling is cue exposure treatment. This involves developing coping skills and desensitizing individuals to the cues for gambling, for example, emotional states or high-risk situations. Cognitive approach. Initiation. Expectancy plays an important role in the initiation of addictive behaviour. The benefits of the activity are overestimated and people are more likely to become addicted if they have cognitive biases which minimise the negative consequences of their behaviour. Addicts often have high levels of impulsivity, placing a higher priority on the present excitement rather than on future consequences, which is called cognitive myopia. They use the addiction as a form of self-medication, believing it will help them cope with specific problems. The addiction may help people cope by reducing negative mood states, for example boredom, and increasing positive moods, for example excitement. Maintenance. The addictive behaviour is maintained because addicts have cognitive biases which emphasise the positive aspects of the behaviour and minimise the negative consequences. Addicts have expectancies that abstinence from the addictive behaviour will lead to negative consequences, which means they will continue with their addiction. Addicts also have a high sense of self-efficacy, believing that they are in control of their addictive behaviour and would be able to give it up as easily as if they wanted to. Relapse. When a person gives up an addiction, they should begin to experience increased self-efficacy or mastery over their behaviour. High-risk emotional states, situations or events can pose a threat to the person's sense of control and lead to relapse, particularly if the person believes that giving up has negative consequences. The cognitive model suggests that relapse can be minimized by understanding the person's beliefs about what constitutes a high-risk situation, enhancing the person's skills for coping with those situations, increasing their self-efficacy, and restructuring their perceptions of the relapse process. Evaluation. It is difficult to separate the effects of learning/association from cognitive factors. Convincing evidence from the biological approach suggests that people may have an underlying biological predisposition to developing an addiction. Assessing people's thought processes is difficult, so gathering cognitive evidence is problematic. The effectiveness of CBT in treating addiction shows that irrational thought processes are an important element of addiction, but it is not possible to say that they are the cause of addiction. Best explanation, biopsychosocial model involving an interaction of factors, biological vulnerability involving the brain's reward systems, family and peer attitudes that support addictive behavior, high levels of impulsivity/cognitive distortions. Application to smoking, initiation. People who start smoking have expectancies that smoking will have positive effects on their lives, for example stress reduction, weight loss, or improved mood. Cognitive biases that minimize negative effects of smoking. Brandon and Baker, 1991, carried out a questionnaire study of psychology students. There is evidence that people start smoking because they are bored and think that smoking will raise their mood, providing evidence for the importance of expectancy. Maintenance. Smoking behavior is maintained because smokers have cognitive biases which emphasize the positive aspects of smoking, for example stress relief, and minimize the negative consequences, for example ill health. Wills and Schiffman, 1985, found that smokers consistently reported that they believed smoking helped them cope with stress. However, in reality, smokers are more stressed than non-smokers. An explanation of this is that for a smoker, smoking a cigarette leads to an immediate reduction of stress, but only because it relieves withdrawal symptoms. This leads to the smoker to the perception that smoking decreases stress levels. Relapse. The cognitive model suggests relapse can be minimized by understanding the person's beliefs about what are high-risk situations, enhancing the person's skills for coping with those situations, increasing their self-efficacy. Tate et al. 1984 found that expectations can be manipulated to prevent relapse. They told one group of smokers they should expect no negative experiences during a period of abstinence. The control group were given no information. The experimental group reported fewer withdrawal symptoms, either physical or psychological, than in the control group. Application to gambling, initiation. Expectancy is important because gamblers emphasize the perceived positive effects of gambling, for example, achieving financial rewards from the gambling, which could help solve problems they are facing in their lives. Griffiths, 1995, found that young problem slot machine gamblers differed from non-problem gamblers in having a greater belief in the role of skill in slot machine gambling and in giving overestimates of the amounts of money they were likely to win. Maintenance. Beck's vicious circle of addiction. The cognitive model proposes that people expect that gambling will improve their mood. However, losing money further lowers mood. The addicted gambler believes that the only way to raise their mood is to keep gambling. Irrational cognitive biases maintain gambling. Gamblers overestimate the extent to which they can influence gambling outcomes and misjudge how much money they have lost or won. Griffiths, 1994, demonstrated that regular gamblers compared to non-regular gamblers showed a variety of cognitive biases, justify their behavior when playing slot machines. In particular, they saw themselves as more skillful at playing than non-gamblers, made more irrational verbalizations, talking and swearing at the machine, made more flexible attributions, attributing wins to their own skill and losses to other factors. Relapse. High-risk emotional states, situations or events can pose a threat to the person's sense of control and lead to relapse, particularly if the person believes that giving up has negative consequences.